Hello everyone and welcome to Twilight Epiphanies Talk Radio with Cindy Magnuson, and the show is about to begin. So slow down, take a seat, put your feet up, and maybe take some notes, because this show is about you, it's for you, and it is designed to help you receive exactly what you need to be a happier and healthier you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 37 of Twilight Epiphanies Talk Radio. I'm your host, Cindy Magnuson, and tonight is the second show in the series, Our Altered Histories. And tonight, my guest is Jay of JayDreamerZ YouTube channel. And we are going to be talking about more information that is coming to the surface about how our history has been significantly altered from what we've been taught. So I'd like to begin with a little bit of a recap of bringing us from show one into this second show here. So in show number one, I introduced, beginning with some of the cosmologies from the past that have been altered, and how those alterations became part of the fairy tales and the myths that we are used to having our children listen to and imprint. And what I talked about was how the Venus cosmologies were altered. And in that place, Venus and Aphrodite became the maidens who were important, and it removed the grandmothers and the mothers from their protection of teaching wisdom to the maidens. And the maidens got elevated in the patriarchal teachings. And what that did was that placed more of a youth at a position of authority. And in that place, then, her authority was challenged with the patriarchal teachings at that time. So going back to that, what I would like to do is also talk a little bit about a dream experience I had. So as a dream shaman and working as a seer in the dream planes, my dreams are often very prophetic and bring me information that I later find out has been validated somehow. So I had attended a light workers workshop, and he was someone who did CDs and music. And at first I wasn't very comfortable already with this individual. If you have a very high empathy and intuition together, you can perceive imbalances in an individual. And the music he was playing in his CDs had a lot of birthing sounds in it. So it sounded very, almost like what you talk about, Jay, with Fantasia, that kind of a music. It was very eerie, and yet it sounded almost like a woman was giving birth. And so while I was attending this workshop, and from one night to another, I had this dream in between. And the dream showed, just in the most significant part of it, was that there were all these shelves of videos, and every video had the word foal on it. So I immediately looked up what foal means, and a foal, a baby horse, of course, which I knew, but what was the significance of it? And foals are imprinted, everything from the mother in the first hour of their life. So it's very significant. And then I did a little research on this person's CD and found out that he was being backed by Disney, that Disney had picked up his music and was using his music. Did a little more research about Disney at that time, and this goes back many years already. Someone had caught an interview with Steven Spielberg, and Steven Spielberg was talking about how sex is in his children's movies, even because sex sells, and he was talking about how he always uses religious themes in the movies and the cartoons, etc. So that was very apparent within that dream, that sequencing there, that imprinting our children in fairy tales and stories and cartoons is also a destructive part of what Disney is doing. While they are utilizing religious themes, esoteric symbolisms, occult understandings within, what is in the Bible is basically in, as you relate to so many times, Jay, that this is one big story happening all the time. So the significance of looking at these stories, but also what I talked about with Venus and the Maiden, which I do recommend anyone going back and listening to that first show that I did, because it will further explain what I talked about. And that's significant, is that the stories of what truly happened were altered. And I have Jay on here with us tonight because he references a lot of that. You understand that, and you're also pulling at the same time out the significant information that is truth, but there are alterations in there that have been changed that are very, very, very important. And as a numerologist, when I work with people, I see very often that when I find a story on someone's numerology chart, I see immediately that they're operating on a story that has misconceptions in it. They're operating from a false story, from misbeliefs, from limited beliefs, from misunderstandings. And so I look at the concepts in there. So tracing it back, we need to go back to, as you've pointed out, Jay, the original stories. That was the true original story that we have bits and pieces of, while we also have altered concepts in here. And one other thing I wanted to mention before I tell us a little bit more about my guest, Jay, today, is that I had just read earlier about a woman who writes about the primordial essence of the arch-goddess here. And her name is, as they used to call her, was the Black Shaman, also known as Baba Yaga. And Baba Yaga, and there were other names that the matriarchal lineages called this energy and essence, was the essence of the matriarchal lineages who would keep in balance the other dimensional levels of where demons or shadows were walking the in-between planes here and interfering with the balance in the world. And they called her the Great Huntress, the demon hunter. But what happened over time was the imbalanced patriarchal system that we're aware of that came in and altered the stories, then they were fearful of her power and they referred to her as the demon. And that's how we get some of the Lilith stories and the Black Shaman, the Dark Madonna stories. So interesting to keep that in reference today, because everyone will be very interested in hearing about Jay's plasma theories. And to me, I sort of looked at that information and how Jay had related to it as part of this cosmology of this cleansing energy here. It is actually, in a sense, also a positive energy as a potential reflection for these practices. So with that, I would like to introduce a little bit about Jay. And so Jay was in the United States Marine Corps during 9/11. He has been around the world. He describes himself as a bit of a Renaissance man, has extensively studied and restudied the Christian Bible from various perspectives, learned the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, studied symbolism of the so-called Illuminati. He has been on YouTube for about 4 years, is writing a book about his findings, and is currently building a website of the topics he researches. He is also conducting workshops in a metaphysical store in Colorado, and then his weekends are devoted to spending time with his family. So today I have invited Jay on to talk about his research specifically into the Titans, the Giants, his theories on the fabric of our dimensional reality, as he refers to as a realm, our return to magic, and the cyclic events of cataclysms possibly caused by plasma events. So with that, I'm going to say hello to Jay. Hello, Jay, and how are you?
Hey, Cindy, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to real quick say, whenever you were talking about, returning to the original stories and finding the breadcrumbs in the stories that have come down to us, like the telephone game, and trying to repiece, what was originally said. That's something that I say quite often, is that, it's not fantasy, it's forgotten. It's myth is just truth, but it's just wrapped in a different shell. It's told in story form, which makes sense when we end up getting into like the plasma apocalypse and stuff like that. Story form makes the most sense out of anything.
Yes.
Whenever you see what was available for people at the time.
Mm-hmm. It was, the first traditions were oral and safe that way, and you had to they taught people to be storytellers and to tell the story the same. But unfortunately then, yes, as we did, you may be familiar, as we went into with the written word, and languages were a time of confusion actually then. So a lot happened about the time of the written word. There's a wonderful book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, and that kind of describes the time frame that when the Bible was printed then, what happened to the original image and symbols that were used and how they got altered. So keeping in mind, that today, as you present your information, I'm excited to hear more about especially the plasma events and what is seen as, these different terms for it and the different stories, that they are all the same stories and the same universal story is our journey in physical and different dimensional realities, coming from more etheric to this and back again. So up and down the ladder. And then, of course, we have different octaves. We have different dimensions. You describe them as realms. I totally understand that. So from myself also studying for years, I've seen that it's nearly impossible to have people come up with looking at having the exact same perspective on a story, because there are so many different angles that the story's been observed from. The stories have changed. The stories have been altered. The stories have been interfered with specifically. And as well, I love the way you also have stated that there are different Earths. So we're looking at the fact that right now we may be merged already with different realities where we have experienced ourselves in other places, and it's our time frame to maybe even go back and balance some of those experiences. So it seems like when there's these big events, that a merging of realities takes place and there's a lot of confusion. So my goal with these shows in here and having you start, we will start with the Titans, is that in looking at this story, how is it, and you've put it so eloquently, that we have a macrocosm story and we have a microcosm story. We have a metaphysical state of inner being, and it also has played out likely on the physical plane. So we have all four of those different perspectives to look at something. So I really, like the way you've presented a lot of your information. I've listened to a lot of JayDreamerZ lately and super enjoyed it. So it is your turn. I'm going to sit back and listen. So if, first of all, let's start out with a little bit about Jay. So I'm new to speaking to Jay here, and I always like to have hear my guest talk a little bit about what his early childhood influences were, that you feel were a significant part of you, moving into where you're at today. So some highlights. You already gave me a little bio, but just maybe some other little highlights. Update us. Yeah,
of course, no problem. So when I was growing up and I was a kid, I always knew there was something off about the world, and I felt like there was something wrong. There was something missing. I found the world to be a very boring place, and it seemed like I was already noticing all the loops and all the routines and everything. And so I often acted out, not, like out of anger or anything, but I did things purposefully to throw a wrench into the system in order to stir something up, and I would find my imagination would just be running wild. People would always say, your imagination's, you're getting carried away with your imagination. I was just thinking to myself, oh, right, why is that so bad, And so the more opposition I had as a creative mind, the more I wanted to have more of a creative mind, The more I wanted to look into things that people, the more I wanted to open doors that were locked and look into the things that people said don't look at, And they put me into like advanced school system stuff, advanced schooling and things, because regular school was too boring, apparently. And so I would learn it, and I'd be like, okay, great, I learned this. Let's move on to what's the next thing, I could probably, at a young age, I figured I could fit all my schooling into like 1 year's worth of schooling, but they just kept being so repetitive and homework and all this stuff, and so they had to put me into an advanced class in order to try to challenge me, which really wasn't even a challenge. It was just the same thing with more difficult questions or whatnot, So that really drove me early on in life to think outside of the box, to almost appreciate my own black sheepness about myself. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Very good. Wonderful. That's how it definitely shows in your videos that you are processing fast and a lot of important information coming in. So very nice. Your skill is wonderful.
Sorry. One of the other things I was going to mention also is like my influences. You were asking about who my influences were or whatnot. I had so many influences. I felt like I learned something of value no matter where I went, no matter what I was watching. But probably, honestly, one of my biggest influences has been the fantasy world, whether it be television shows or movies or cartoons or video games, all of those things. Those were things, and even like when I was a child in the 80s, the common saying about all of those avenues where it's going to rot your brain, and I didn't let it rot my brain. I learned hand-eye coordination from playing my video games. I learned how to think on my toes. I learned, how to look into the deeper meanings of what's being given to me. I was never one to just sit mindlessly and stare at something forever and ever. I processed it. I took it in, at an early age, and I learned a lot of different things. But it's whenever I started, when I was watching the television, I was learning what the television told me. But then when I transitioned into reading books, that really opened my mind that I can take what has been given to me and I can play with it. You know what I mean? Yeah. I can really start being creative and using my own imagination and giving my own input on these things.
Yeah, using your discernment. Yeah. So that you were, and that is something that people don't always do when they're watching something. They kind of just download the whole thing as opposed to kind of finding that they can use their discernment on it. Mm-hmm. We're doing that at a very young age. Yes, putting the puzzle pieces together. Very good. And I can agree with you. I definitely enjoy those realms a little bit more, even though I wasn't involved in that same way. But I could probably watch the Netflix series Once Upon a Time over and over again and pick up something different in there that relates to everything that's upcoming right now. And I'm happy in that space, and it's interesting watching the castles and going, oh my gosh, those are the Tartarian buildings that are around here. They're here. So very fascinating, everything in there, even wiping the memory. So let's begin then with
the Titans.
You
right?
said your research or your YouTube channel, JayDreamerZ, 4 years ago, and the Titans and understanding that. So present to us your explanation of the Titans.
Sure. So I didn't really start off with the Titans. There were some bridges I had to cross in order to get to the existence of Titans. And when I talk about the Titans, I'm talking about the beings that we think of when we think of a titanic being, the Titans, right? But in my mind, it's all very real. It's all very factual and historical, and these things did exist. Like I said, mythology is just truth in story form. And so the more I started looking into things like, I think I started with the giants, because the beginning of my real truth-seeking path, where I was actively, trying to gather information and figure things out, was a religious one, like a lot of people. And so, I was looking into the Bible, and I was scouring every page. I was looking at all the anomalies. I had questions about anything I didn't understand. I had questions about, so I would take those. Well, one of the biggest anomalies and questions that biblical scholars have is Genesis chapter 6, and what of the giants? Were they real? Were they literal? Were they metaphorical, figurative? Were they the sons of Seth? Were they this, that, or the other thing? So I started asking a lot of questions about the giants, and I started getting a lot of pushback, and thousands of different answers. And that's when I said, you know what? Forget asking everybody else what the answer is. I have made it this far. I'm going to research it on my own, and I'm going to get a better idea for myself. And so I started looking into the giants and opening my mind up that there could be possibly beings that are humanoid, that are just giant in stature compared to us today, regular humans of today. So then once I got the giants under my belt, it wasn't much further of a leap whenever I started looking into the stories and the myths and the legends of the Titans themselves. One almost has to when researching this, because you're going to run into Greek mythology, which is the most, popularizer of the Titans and the giants, due to their titanomachy, or the war between the giants and the Titans.
And when you say giants, what approximate height are you looking at?
Honestly, I don't know. I couldn't give you, I could sort of guess. I could give you a comparison, right? Because ultimately, the further back in time we go, I found that people and all beings were larger and larger and larger and larger. We've been shrinking as time goes forward. And so it's really only comparative, you know what I mean? Because if I were to say, well, this big back then to the humans of back then, or to the giants of back then, who were also much larger than we think of when we think of the giants or the humans, it's all comparative, you know what I mean? And that gets back to the fractal verse and the microcosm, the macrocosm, and those things. But, just to give a good comparison, I would say today's standards, if a Titan were to walk into the towns, it would be comparable to a skyscraper at the very least.
Okay. And then a giant, roughly 13. I know there's people who talk about skeleton remains that are anywhere from, let's say, 13 to 30 feet. Approximately, and right. A bit of a range for giants. And then, of course, there are a lot of Tartarian pictures with that civilization being very tall and looking to be, they appear to be about maybe, 15 feet approximately in some of those pictures.
That's right. And we have to keep in mind as well that those are just the lengths of the skeletons that we found who came from that particular region, that particular time. You know what I mean? There's all the possibilities are still out there. But in general, humans being the smallest, the giants, aka the gods, the El, the Elohim, and so on and so forth, coming before us, those are our forefathers. And then, of course, the Titans were their forefathers. That's sort of the family.
Yes. Okay. So reality is scaled, and we're kind of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids right now. we're in that place that which stands to reason. And so you have on your videos images of rock formations that you are telling us are Titan individuals that were petrified into stone?
Yes.
Can you take us into that understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to take us, well, let me start. This is probably easier to explain in story form, as all things are, okay? So originally we had the Titans being the biggest creatures of all. The Titans went to war with their sons and daughters, who were the gods or the giants, right? And there was this 10-year war between the Titans and the giants, basically a family war, one against the other, where the giants had won over the Titans. And one of the key descriptors in Greek mythology is that there was a secret weapon used by the giants in order to take out the Titans. That was the monsters of old, namely being the Hecatenares and the Cyclops, or the Cyclops, right? And it's said that those monsters had the ability to petrify the Titans themselves. So whenever I look at things with a plasma catastrophe point of view, and I can see the factual and physical historical way that things happened as opposed to the cartoonification of how it happened. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then we're able to see that there was some sort of a weapon that was used in order to petrify the Titans themselves. And of course, we've got all these petrification stories over time, time immemorial. As far back as we can go, there's always some sort of a petrification weapon, or petrification was a penalty for breaking some law, or, a lot of times it was sort of seen as like a taboo form of weaponry that's not always implemented or whatnot. However, that's what happens. That's what's being described to us as how the Titans lost that war. They turned into rock and they turned into stone. I don't want to jump too far ahead and spoil it or anything, but that would be directly due to the 100-armed being, which equates to the plasma arms that will come down from the sky one of these days. I know that's a huge jump I just did there.
That's okay. Yeah, no. And so the formations that are a lot of pictures that we can see in different stone formations. One, of course, it looks like there's a complete, human being laying in the mountainside. Mm-hmm. We have areas around the world that are called Garden of the Gods. We see faces in stones, and so theoretically, when you do your videos then and you're posting these pictures, you are stating that these are actual petrified remains in some locations where there are stone formations that are just coming up out of the ground that don't look normal to be there. We see there's elephant formations and...
Right. Yeah, that's definitely one thing I would emphasize is, there are some people who would look at a mountain and say, wow, it really resembles a giant laying down or a Titan laying down. Therefore, all the mountains are dead Titans and they all turn into rock. I'm not saying that everything is a dead Titan, etc. What I am saying is that many things in the pre-Stone Age, because this is how we came to this is how we got to the Stone Age, was everything was turned into stone. That everything on the surface of our world that was touched by these plasma tentacles, at least the strongest portions of them, I would say, had the potential to turn into rock. And that's the story of Medusa. That's the gargoyles as well. It's something that I like to talk about. That's the reason why we put the stone monsters on the sides of the buildings. One, it's because, it helps to get the water off of the building and it shoots it away from the building. But it's usually some sort of a monster, which is the same as a giant or a Titan, and it's petrified, and the water is typically coming out of the mouth, which is symbolic of the eternal curse that they had petrified, and they all drowned because there was a flood that ran concurrent with the petrification and the other cataclysmic events that were happening at the time. So this is the building owner's way of saying, beware, right? We already took out the biggest and the baddest. We already took out the Titans. That's why the symbol for the gods is the Nike swoosh or the sickle or the hook, the V, the letter V, the Vav, all that.
Sure. Okay. And so in regards to this theory is all over the internet right now. You particularly specializing in people doing mud fossils and et cetera. So is there a difference between mud fossils versus the petrified stone? And have there been any scientific studies on the stone formations that do appear to be fossilized titans?
Well, there's been one that I know of for sure, which is the YouTube channel Mud Fossil University that's ran by a guy named Roger. He
Yes.
did a DNA test on some rocks that he was absolutely convinced these are petrified body parts. The DNA test came back. He posted it on the internet for everyone to look at. You know, I've got it saved on my computer. And
Yeah.
the results came back positive that there's DNA in these rocks. And it's not, you know, they checked for all the X factors to make sure there wasn't debris that ended up in the rock or anything. But yeah, not only that, but it is absolutely factual. It's not even it's not speculation or a theory. People, you know, organic organisms, including humanoid beings, have been turned into stone. I don't know if you saw my video I did about humans turning into stone, but I talked about Girolamo Sagato and how he knew the secret to petrifying a human being, not mummification, but actually turning the body, the skin and everything into rock. And, you know, he met with his quickly after that, and all his lost, just like everybody.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, we've got fossilized wood.
Yeah.
That's an organic creature, basically, and the people as well can be fossilized. Anything, I think, can basically turn into rock.
Well, it definitely is obvious in looking at a lot of the large stone formations that appear to be either an animal or humanoid type, that it definitely, you know, wasn't carved that way by wind and et cetera,
Right.
and rain. That is very clear that it doesn't get that accurate in that. So, okay, yeah, I've been on Roger's website before, and then he does reference also something about, I don't know if it's the Max Planck University, possibly. So that the studies have gone a little bit farther. Yeah, he has what he likes the toe bones and looks at the stones as having both the artery and the vein coming out on each side in the holes. And then of course you also have one of your videos on the striated sands that you talked about as being potentially muscle fibers, pectoral muscle fibers.
Right.
And when we do look at that, what could possibly be forming those striations as such like that?
Living tissue. That's where everything is alive. Everything, life begets life. There is no, you know, that's why we're taught, we're not even taught what a rock is or what sand is or what any things that these things are. We are led to assume. You see, we actually are taught what these things are. They do tell us what to believe that these things are. They do it by omission. They do it by allowing there are certain times in our lives where, for the most part, they like to keep a lock on our creativity. But there are some times when they're silent and they allow our creativity to just go on into overdrive, so that basically we come up with how their lies and falsities could possibly make sense, you know, and the brain and the mind gets excited to be creative for once and to use the right side instead of the left side. But like I was saying, if you look at, you know, some of the older legends, especially in the Norse traditions, they talk about, you know, in the very, very beginning, there was life. There was a super, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, there's a super titan.
Sure.
And then life breaks off of that. And then more life breaks off of that. And more life breaks off of that, because it's fractal, like I talk about the fractal verse. But the earth is alive. And that's something that, you know, people can't really wrap their minds around these days, when a long time ago, to the natives of every culture around our world, that was common knowledge, that they knew that the earth was alive and is alive to this day, you know? And so that's where the Titans come from. They come from the earth. And that's why our earth takes the shapes. Well, that's one of the reasons why the earth takes the shape that it does. You know, it's like a giant forest floor. Things fall off, things die, they land on the forest floor. We walk around on top of it, and then we add to it, and it continues to build and to grow and to grow.
Yeah. And yeah, so civilizations and humans have likely been around for millions of years, as opposed to the general stories. I think it's the Veda, Sanskrit and India texts that talk about that this is that we've been around for 2 billion years, that humanoid type beings were in the middle of a 2 billion year cycle, something like that. So they really go back far. And one of the individuals who is upcoming in one of the last shows, Steve Richards of Holographic Kinetics, he talks about, when he's doing his healing work with people, he talks about finding draconian type reptilian beings within the energy field of the people he's working on, and how those energies got into there. And he helps to, you know, complete a cycle properly in order to remove those two energy fields being together. And some of the information he got back was that in his studies, he talks about worlds colliding 1 million years ago, and that the reptilians believe they were here first, and that's resultant of what kind of has happened in this merging.
Right.
And in truth, so many, obviously we're immortal. So we are looking at stories that take us in and out of time, and we've likely, as you've referenced, designed a bit of the forgetting so that we don't go mad with the understanding that we're mortal, and we are, you know, repeating life in general up and down the scales of different forms that consciousness can inhabit, if we're not going to just go back into a void and be non-existent. And, you know, so it's interesting the amount, if we think about it, of potentials of, as you know, we get into the remains that are here in the buildings built one on top of another, structures in these important parts of the earth where they've built, you know, these buildings, but there's just civilizations going all the way down. And how else could it be? So also Petrified, let's just talk a little bit about these giant mushrooms.
Yeah, well, I mean, the giant mushrooms, they just happen to be a particular shape that they stand out when one is out there looking for the mud fossils of the world. And the mud fossils can be anything. It doesn't have to be organic, so to speak. It could be ancient technology that petrified. It could, you know, turned into rock. It could be anything whatsoever that happened to be on the surface of the world at that time and, you know, susceptible to it. I'm sorry, I got my brain off track. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, no, it was just about the petrified mushrooms.
Oh, that's right.
The fact that, and just even in mentioning it for people so that they understand too, because ever since, you know, I started watching, you know, I'm your videos, I look at pictures that are around the internet a little bit different now. And personally, I've always seen images within something. So it's something that I tend to pick out. There's even maybe an interdimensional imprint of something, you know, over in an area that's maybe more mystical, you know, or related energetically to having, you know, what we would say are spirits, you know.
Right.
Terms. Okay. So
well, the mushrooms, basically, not only are they the exact same as, you know, they are mud fossils, and they're seen all over the place. It's okay. There's something called pareidolia, I believe it's called pareidolia. And that's whenever people, for example, look at a ink blot and they see images and pictures, or they look at a cloud up in the sky and they see images and pictures. And even though other people would say, well, it's just the cloud, or it's just an ink blot, or whatnot, right? Not taking the fractal verse into consideration, nor taking any of the ancient ways of the shamans and the witch doctors and the witches and wizards and warlocks of old, who knew what divination was as well, which is right along the same thing. Some things, when they're turned into rock and they're preserved forms of the original, there's no pareidolia involved. It's just, you look right at it and say, wow, that's a mushroom, you know, or wow, that's, yeah. But the mushrooms are the easiest ones, and they pop up so much in my research. I'm always coming right back. No matter what avenue I go back to, mushrooms keep popping up along my path, especially like the mycelial network and the spores that are all over the place, you know. And it may be that mushrooms are an integral part of our world that we have taken for granted and overlooked as far as their properties go and their ability to instantly communicate go. Yeah, definitely. Definitely, that keeps coming up more and more, and the significance of that. Very good. Okay, and then, so the audience knows, you have multiple videos on this that they can be watching. We have pictures playing below the radio show also that people can refer to for these images that you have found all around the world in your very vast collection. And so in your research also, in finding that there have been catastrophic events that took place as someone's, would you say, their era? So the Titans are here, their era is coming to an end. Yes.
It's a great battle, but then there's also a catastrophe. So an age is coming to an end. A theme that is run out, similar to how we're ending actually very large cycles of time right now, are kind of in alignment all at once, that we're ending a 25,000-year cycle, a 2,000-year cycle, and there are more. There's a 250,000-year cycle that we're ending. So when there are cycle changes, in my opinion, the end meets the beginning. And that's somewhat also of another way to look at the snake eating its tail. Not only is it a time loop that you could go around again, but the snake eating its tail always comes together, in my opinion, that the end meets the beginning. And that's sort of how we are, like I had a dream and a vision where there was an egg shape. And it was just the outline of the egg. And there were bubbles all inside the egg. And a force that was moving those bubbles that kept them apart was not there anymore. And then those bubbles all fell to the bottom, and they were merging together. And that was, in my mind, helping me to remember that what I see also happening is that in numerology, when we get to a 9 time frame like this, a completion time frame, you do sort of an awake life review. So you start to look at, what should I keep? What has to go? What do I have to complete before I can move to a next octave? And you're not going to move to another place. You're going to stay in the time loops unless you cleanse and clear and make it to a new octave. But you have to almost do like a review. Well, how best to do a review? Then 9's always a drama time frame. It's a heightened, it's emotions, because we're in cleansing. So it would be a time frame when, very appropriately so, the veil's thin, the ice walls melt, everything heats up and starts burning off in purification. Everything what happens if you're going to be in center, in the middle? You would have to be able to stand there by giving up either one of your points on the spectrum that you're holding. You would have to come back to center. So it seems like in this end meeting the beginning, then everyone has, and what they're experiencing, they're meeting consequences. They are experiencing in other reflections aspects of themselves. They're maybe opening up, underworld places, which can be positive if you're going to cleanse something. So a lot of heightened drama, and that is exactly what we are in right now. That's it, as this ends here. So you have researched and done some very fantastic data about what you feel is a plasma event that may be one of the types of events or the biggest type of event that takes place during a potential cleanse like this. So can you describe that to us? And
Sure, absolutely.
that's vast. So, but
no, that's totally fine. You hit the nail right on the head. Really, it's all about being clean. That's really what it's about. And by being clean, I mean being pure, by being good and loving, and all the positive attributes that every religion has encouraged us to, to hold dear to ourselves. So when the world becomes dirty, and by dirty I mean full of evil, right? That's whenever Mother Nature steps in and does some spring cleaning, sweeps it all out, gets rid of all the dirt and grime and filth. And it's a cyclical thing. Mother Nature keeps her house tidy, according to her timeline. Whenever it needs to be cleansed, she reaches in and cleanses it basically herself. I can go into like the specifics if you want me to, of what to look for or what to expect or how it typically works, To
bring us into, how did you discover this? What were your little steps that brought you into suddenly, on your page, it's plasma event. So what was the, precursor to you coming to this understanding that...
Well, it was suddenly plasma, but it was not suddenly, let's talk about the end of the world or eschatology or, the reset or anything. I've been talking about that for a very long time.
Okay.
Been studying those things. I've had such a profound and deep interest in these things, directly related to nearly every dream I've ever had in my life, all end of the world cataclysmic type situations.
Okay. Yeah.
Very strong as far as that goes. So I've always been interested, and I've been studying the topic for a great many years, and reading all the various works of Edgar Cayce and Nostradamus and Leonardo da Vinci and, pretty much any book I can get my hand on about the subject, including and especially all of the world's religious scriptures, right?
Yeah.
So I've been researching it for a very long time. And then I came across a YouTube video during my current research. And, I was researching the flat earth and the plane of existence and various cosmologies and various ideas that people are having, and this wonderful awakening that we're going through, all these different ideas people are coming up with. I didn't allow myself to get caught up in choosing teams or, really taking my flag out of one piece of ground and planting it into another. I just keep my flag with me wherever I go. That way I'm always at home.
Yes.
But anyhow, I came across this video where this guy was talking about the plasma apocalypse, and he kind of went into how it could be possible from a flat earth perspective. Oh, I should say a semi-flat earth perspective. It's not completely flat earth. It actually incorporates the globular model, the flat earth model, and the concave model as well.
Yes.
People make arguments for all of those, which I love, because I already knew there's truth in everything. So I knew there's truth in every single one of these models that people are all presenting. It's just that people lock on to one thing, and like a cat that doesn't want to be picked up, they just dug their claws right into, where they stood, and they wouldn't be willing to be moved into a new place, but I retracted my claws and I allowed myself to go from place to place. But as I started, I was watching this guy's videos, and he only made a few of them. And so I was kind of forced to really jump in and do my own research, because he was basically encouraging people like, here's a little bit of info. The rest of it is out there. And sure enough, the rest of it is out there. So I started really digging into making all the correlations. Some stuff instantly just popped like a bubble in my brain. Light bulbs went off all over the place. It was like an electric show in my mind, and I could not sleep for like 2 days because I was there's so many puzzle pieces, and this one was the one that was just right out in front of me, and I finally grasped it, and it made everything else make sense. It tied in. I would say it is the ultimate puzzle piece. Well, thus far, you know, I'm all excited about it right now, but who knows? I could figure out something else later on or come to some new revelation. But right now, it fits very nicely with every single conspiracy theory I've ever heard, with the cycle of time, with alternative history or esoteric history or hidden history, as you know, a lot of people like to refer to it as. But yeah, when I came across his videos, it light popped on in my head, and immediately I began in-depth research for probably at least 3 straight weeks, like way over 8 hours a day, pretty much just sitting at my computer, reading all my different books, going over all my different notes and research and everything. I was trying to write my book at the time, but I kept running into a mental block as I was trying to write this book. Every time, like, I have all this information to write my book, I would sit down and then my body would not want to type. It was like, no, you're not ready yet. And then once I came across the plasma element, the plasma apocalypse, or specifically the cyclical plasma apocalypse, okay? Because it's according to my research thus far, it is the cyclical reset. It is the hero and the anti-hero in all of our stories, and that marks the beginning and the end of the never-ending story that we live. And every single thing since then, I have looked at everything, and I can see it's all part of this never-ending story, you know, just like the movie. Like I said, I learned a lot from the movies when I was growing up. The Never-Ending Story was one of those movies. So now when I'm looking at everything, I can literally pull up the Netflix menu, and every single thumbnail of every single movie, I'm going, oh, well, this is from that particular part of history, from this perspective, you know, and this is from this other part of history. It's all true, every single bit of it. You know, there's no fiction, there's no sci-fi, there's no fantasy, there's no untrue story. It is all true stories that are being told or retold, you know, as cartoon versions of the original. But in reality, I couldn't say the original, because the original keeps happening over and over and over again. You know what I mean? But yeah, I started looking into the plasma apocalypse, and all these things started to make sense. So if you want me to, I can go ahead and give you a quick, as fast as I can, rundown of like basically the things to look out for and the series of events of how it happens. And if you want to jump in at any time, if you have a question about these, you can ask me, you know. Okay, so everything starts with the signs. All of the prophets of old have all said, here are the things to look for. None of them knew when it was going to happen, either A, because it's not exactly cyclical. It may happen on off seasons or off times, or when needed, right? If it's Mother Nature just cleaning things out. If mankind becomes overcorrupt in 5 years, then you can have it 5 years later, you know, possibly. But all these prophets, they understood the Hermetic principles of the time working in cycles, that everything works in cycles. There's an ebb and a flow to everything. So they know when you understand and have comprehension of the past, you can easily predict the future. You can easily tell people what's to expect and, you know, what's to come. So they told us all of these signs because they knew what had preceded. They knew the signs as they had already happened. They told us to look for certain ones. One of the main ones, I also did a video about this, is the trumpets in the sky, or the strange sky sounds. That's one of the signs that many of these religions and myths and legends, they all talk about. They explain it. They explain it in their stories in different ways. They cartoonify it according to their own preferences and culture and time and all of that stuff. But they're all talking about the same thing, that sound that's coming from above that means the end is near, right? The trumpets are blowing, the angels are blowing their trumpets, all that stuff, you know, and everyone knows it's about to happen. Well, that is, in essence, according to my research so far, that's the ice that's above us. That's the dome of ice, just like we're in a snow globe, and that ice is making those sounds on a gigantic, massive planetary scale. And as the ice I don't know if it's cracking or just thinning out, but I do know, and anyone can look this up. If you can go look up the sound that a glacier makes. It's the exact same sound as I've heard so many times on many videos and even in person myself,
Yeah. We recently had those sounds here in Illinois. Very recently, in some of the weather we had those sounds. And it's like, what is going on? And that's exactly what they described. So they did happen. And we are close to the San Madrid fault, if that has anything to do with it. But I know there were also, when that's happening, the Earth itself also, isn't the Earth also at the core heating up at the same time? Is this happening?
Oh, that depends on where a person's perspective lies, right? Because we've got the globular model that talks about the Earth having a core and that it's heating up, etc. According to the model that I've been kind of showing people, which is absolutely could be wrong, but it makes a lot of sense to me. The Earth is hollow. Our land is hollow, I should say, and there are essentially two levels of Earth. There is the surface level, and then there's the inner level. And the inner level, or Hades, Tartarus, it's been described as so many things. It's the inner Earth. And that, like I said, this model incorporates the hollow Earth, the flat Earth, the spherical Earth, all of these things together.
Okay, I see. So, and okay. And I do tend to think that with all of these, as you said, with all of these different stories, all of these different potentials have played out in their own place, and they all seem to come together at this time. We have this merging of all these different realities together, and it is a very confusing time. And we do have to sort of just come to, as you said, put your flag wherever you're at, a neutral space.
Right.
I had a dream with Nikola Tesla in it, and it was interesting because I didn't know what he looked like. This was a dream in the past, and I was walking around the rim of a valley, and a man passes me by, and then he comes back and he gives me a cup of coffee, and I'm a little apprehensive, but he's jogging, and there's a valley where it dips in, similar to something like Martin Kenney's, cosmic egg theory, where it dips in the middle in the center of the Earth there, where everything goes down in concave. And there was a crystalline university in there. So I'm up on that edge. And then after that, I had a prophetic dream. And this is interesting because it kind of links with a wave that Martin Lipke talks about in his videos as a big black wave, the big black serpent coming. And there's this big, huge black wave coming super high. It's, miles high. And it's going to come onto land from the water. But if I'm wearing a fisherman's rain hat, like he would on a boat, and a fisherman's coat, us will be okay. And it goes onto land, and it goes in between two rocks. And as it goes in between there, also when it comes back, if I'm there in center, and the place of being between land and water is meaning the in between realms. So being in neutral, when these cycles come through, this big wave is coming through. At that time of my life, it was also like what we go through on a microcosmic level as the midlife crisis span of time. But it was also, to me, referencing, receiving information, not necessarily from Nikola Tesla. It was a projection. But I saw the picture of who he was a couple days later and went, oh my gosh, that was Tesla. So, but that was my own inner self just picking up, that information. But it was interesting because it was on the rim. And I want to, talk about a little bit of a dream that I had also as I was connecting with you here in the information. But that it, goes down into that valley, which to me is like the inner Earth. To me, that's almost like the same thing, that place. And but the point is, being in the in-between and the neutral is very important. If poles are going to shift, where's the safest place to be? Not in an extreme.
Right.
even extreme light is blinding.
Right.
People who hide out in extreme light, where is the worst of our negativity happening? In our extreme light profiles of politicians supposed to be extreme light, religion's supposed to be extreme light, but we have the worst of the worst hiding behind that bright light image, and it's not really there. So bright can be also blinding at that center point. So center is very important. So it's very important that you said that. I appreciate that, and understanding that it's true that all these stories have played out. And I just do want to just also, kind of tenuously poison here and state, remember that whatever story that you identify with is what you're going to take with you to the next place. So really do a big discernment about the story. So when you go to neutral, we don't have to have conflict or war because we're in neutral. So a lot of times I think people reincarnate into the same stories also because they can't imagine an original story without the conflict. I'm all into understanding that, of course, over time, we got a little bored, okay? So people wanted to have conflict because you're going to get bored if there's not conflict. It's just a fact. There's this part of the Celestine prophecy, and the one world is cracking and shaking because there's catastrophes happening in another world. So the closeness that the dimensions are, and the little boy who's listening, and it's kind of a part of the male energy, the little boy is excited over the noise that he's hearing, and he's curious about it. So there's a little bit, I will say, to understand that what story you identify with is a story in time. It is a realm. And you can also imagine less conflict into a realm that you're going in, but you kind of have to decide. Does that make sense? So it's a little bit of a cautionary on
right.
all of these stories, just to remind people that we kind of, we are so inundated with, I'll give an example. So I named my first company Trinity Croft, Trinity from the Matrix and Laura Croft, because I wanted to kick the bad guys' asses. And what I realized what was happening in my life, I kept running into the bad guys, constantly. And I'm like, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense here. So if I go in for the fight, I'm going to have the characters for the fight. So once upon a time, even in the Enchanted Forest, there was likely a place where there's less conflict, but you kind of have to be there. You're going to have to you're going to have to leave identifications with what we get not comfortable, but even excited about here. So I'll just leave that at that and let, but just as that's like the mom and me going, because we don't want to send our children to war. I can't, and I can't identify with it, but I can also understand the male energy in a different way to have a need to, battle. But to do that in a constructive way, I believe the way that indigenous people would set it up and work with it so that energy was satisfied, so that it was settled, it was appeased in a way, but there's probably more constructive ways. So we kind of fall into the deeper rabbit holes and we forget that we are the authors of the story, all the time. We truly are, the authors, and we can write them differently. We just kind of forget that,
Yeah.
But so your plasma event before.
Yeah, and I also want to say that I absolutely agree. Like I think that's what we're always taught by some of the best gurus of the times have been to take the middle path and to be neutral about things, to just kind of watch and go through life and see what happens, you know, or as Winnie the Pooh says, sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing, you know. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll try to go a little quicker so I don't elaborate on everything. There's so much in there, and obviously I've done the videos about it. But the sun disappears. Many cultures talk about that. The stars falling down, the moon dimming or going dark completely for a time. The giants and titans returning, which is also a very interesting, part of all of it. Is not just that, like that's a part of our past, but we still have this cyclical cataclysm. The titans and the giants, all of this is a part of that story, and it's a repeating story. Everything floats. That's a new one for me, which is very exciting. I did the video called "Don't Get Sucked Up into the Sky." This is the rapture. This is the aliens beaming people upward into the sky and taking people to their world or whatnot. That's just the hole in the sky opening up. If I were to explain it real quick, if you look at our world like a snow globe and it's pressurized, and then you put a hole in the top of the snow globe, everything that's on the inside wants to make its way to that center point, right? It wants to explode and come out like a soda that's been shaken, right? So basically, we've got everything going upward that's not tied to the ground or a part of the earth or under the earth as well, or inside of the earth. And that only happens for a little while. And then we've got, like I said, the ice dome basically explodes. And that's, for a lack of better, getting in depth on it, that's just because the electromagnetic force that holds our world together, because it is an electromagnetic universe, there's the whole electric universe movement and the Thunderbolts project and all of that. That is very much incorporated into this idea. The world depressurized. The moment that our world depressurizes, all of our atmosphere turns into mist. It turns into fog. And so this is also repeated in all of these ancient scriptures. It's in the Bible. I mean, it's in the book of Genesis right there in the very beginning that God sent a mist up from the earth, in order to water everything, as well as the phantazoids, which I can talk about, later if you want. But the monsters that come down from the sky and they intermingle into our world, the great beasts of old. Let's see. We also have... our world becomes depressurized. Everything gets foggy. People, develop bloody noses and stuff, which is typical for psychic revelation or psychic power. That something, typically if you see it in the movies, it means that something, what's the word I'm looking for? Something bigger than life is about to happen, basically. Someone's going to start bleeding, that something... a
shift in the energy field changed. Yeah. Definitely in the energy field, yes.
And then we've got all of our rockets all the way around the world, and this for me really answers a lot of questions about the space agencies, because a lot of people don't know how to feel about the space agencies, going as far back as, back into the 70s and 60s and stuff, and people were raising their eyebrows saying, what are you guys really up to? What's really going on? And people question the moon landing, and people question, even today, a lot of people, mostly spearheaded by the flat earth movement, but many other people, they question our space agencies, which are just government organizations. So in this theory, I believe it makes sense that the portal or the hole in our sky is going to open up. That's the only time, because we live in a pressurized, sealed off world, and that seal is up there to protect us. But it opens up, and that's the time when people can get out, when somebody can leave this world to fly up into the heavens and soar high above the heights of man and into the heavenly realms and the other places, or space, or whatever, however people look at it, the magic school bus inside the human body for some people. But yeah, NASA will blast off. So we all see this huge cataclysmic event happening, strange things happening in the sky everywhere, which is another one of the signs, by the way. Our world will become charged. The charge is going to increase, and so we're going to see a lot of real intense weather, a lot of real strange light phenomenon happening in the skies everywhere, because the plasma itself is starting to charge itself up and trying to ground itself, and it's trying to reach out basically and shake hands with the plasma that's on the other side of the ice barrier. And our world is starting to really charge up. And we'll see all the rockets being shot up into the sky. We're being conditioned right now to think that that's us fighting the aliens, because when the portal in the sky opens and the aliens come in, which are just probably the people from the other worlds and the Phantazoids, because they know this is the only time they can slide into our world, we're taught to shoot them. We're taught to fire our guns in the sky, and we're going to see all these rockets blasting off. We're going to cheer on our governments, but it's really just NASA and the best doomsday preppers of all time leaving. They're like, this is our shot, goodbye, which actually that's reciprocated in like Zechariah Sitchin when he translated the Enuma Elish and some of the other Babylonian tablets. It talked about how the Anunnaki all disappeared around the same time. They got into their rockets, they all shot off on the sky, and they were never heard from again. Some people thought they went to the moon. The moon for me is just a code word for our sister world, the world that's right across from us. So it makes sense to me that all of this stuff is going down. We see all these rockets shooting up. They're conditioning us not to be too pissed off at them whenever we see them leaving us behind, right? We think something else entirely is happening. Anyhow, so you've got that going on. Everything getting sucked up. There's going to be a lot of silence that comes, a lot of wind, you know what I mean? Because basically air that's getting sucked up into that middle hole up at the top of our world right above the North Pole, the most likely place where the sky dome will erupt from. The air around us, our atmosphere, will get sucked upwards. However, the atmosphere is fluid, so it will be cyclonic. It will create a vortex as things get sucked upwards, right? So things are going to get sucked upwards in this sort of vortex, and it's not as it's going to be the biggest, basically like a combination of a hurricane and a tornado all in one, but it's not going to be all the way across the world, so I don't want your viewers to get too scared or anything. The closer you are to the epicenter, the stronger and more fantastic it's going to be, right? But you have, just like with tornadoes, everything in the middle, you have the calm, the eye of the storm, right? Which would be the North Pole. And then around that, you have the most turbulence and everything's getting sucked up. However, after it gets sucked up, a lot of times it gets shot right back down to the ground. That's super cold air that's coming right back down, which could instantly just flash freeze anything that it touches, animals or plants or anything, which for me helps to make perfect sense out of the mammoths that we found, and some, I believe, rhinoceros and things like that, that were flash frozen and just instantly frozen around the Arctic Circle, Siberia, parts of Alaska, I believe, parts of Canada. People don't know why. They don't have a great explanation. I've never heard a good explanation for it, but this makes sense that all this, it's just like in the movie 2000, or what was it, The Day After Tomorrow with Jake Gyllenhaal. And in the movie The Day After Tomorrow, they explain this all word for word with just a different twist on it, So anyhow, you got everything being flash frozen. The Phantazoids come in, and the Phantazoids are the monsters of old, I playfully call them the space whales, okay? Because whale is another word for monster. That's what they use. That's in Genesis chapter 1. Before God created humans or anything else, he created the great monsters of old. However, most translations put the word whale in there because people don't want to correlate God with making a monster or anything. But the monsters come into our world, and I believe that it's very possible that whenever that hole above our world is opened up, that they either get sucked in or they fall in or they purposefully come in. Either way, a lot of monsters come into our world. And then instead of calling them monsters, because I don't believe in taking sides, I don't believe in the indoctrination that I've been taught, that to immediately think that something that's foreign to myself is worthy of death or being called the bad guy or my adversary. I just call them Phantazoids, that they are essentially fractal beings that have left the microcosm and entered into the macro, or the reverse, the macrocosm entering into our micro. So we've got the phantasoids coming in at the same time that the world is inundated with this instant fog by the pressurization. The plasma comes down and enters in, right? The plasma is above our world. Academia, mainstream academia, has already done studies in the past 5 to 10 years. They're finding that our world is surrounded by these huge plasma tubes just outside of our planet, even according to the globular model,
Yes.
that there are these huge plasmic tubes everywhere. Some are speculated at being super cold plasmas. Some are speculated at being super hot plasmas. But the one constant is that academia agrees our world is surrounded by these plasmic tubes. Well, it's just plasma, just to, but I call them plasma tentacles because when they come down into our world, we're not going to see them as tubes that much, but we're actually going to see them and describe them in many fantastic and cartoonified and larger-than-life ways because a lot of people aren't going to know what it is. So they're just going to see a giant purple octopus of, this ghostly octopus coming down, and that turns into Cthulhu and, the World Slayer and, so many different names and so many different epithets that it's gone by. But essentially the plasma reaches down into our world, which is already full of plasma. Our world has plasma in it from the last time that our world was filled with the plasma from above, and then it was sealed off, keeping all of that plasma in here with us. Slowly, I believe, sort of dissipating as time goes on until it needs a refill, basically. And the plasma comes into our world and does a great many things that will be interpreted in a great many ways. But the main thing, like we talked about, is it's cleansing this world out, right? So the plasma comes in, this is the pillar of God. This is the pillar of fire that goes up. This is the tentacles, the fingers of God, the hand of God. So many different things in comic books. It's the character Starro that attaches to people and stuff. But anyway, the plasma comes in, and one of the main things that you're going to see is it's going to burn stuff because plasma can be very hot, and it's going to burn up a bunch of our world, just like biblically speaking in the book of Revelation. It talks about a third of the world, grass and trees, and basically things that can be combustible, they will all burn up, And so the plasma is going to go around, and the things that it touches may set on fire. Well, they will set on fire, basically. So it'll be a huge inferno, which is right in line with all the other prophecies that I've read and come into contact personally with that says that the ancients knew that the world would be destroyed in 2 different ways. The first time by water, the second time by fire. This is the time for the fire to come, which, it's obviously going to have water in there as well because there's going to be tsunamis and huge tidal waves, especially with the loss of so-called gravity. Water itself is just going to rise up into the air. The waves will just create, like in the movie Interstellar, they'll just, like in your dream, they'll just be like huge mile-long tidal waves just going straight up. Anyhow, and then we've got the plasma coming in, it petrifying things, it burns things up, it does a great many things, it terraforms our world, it scars our world, like the Grand Canyon, It can definitely rip pieces of our world. It's going to actually electrify the world. So some parts, especially I believe those parts that are going to be very muddy from all of the debris and all of the water sloshing around and whatnot, the parts that are muddy and electrified will tend to raise up to meet it in the air because the water is actually attracted to it. So the water that's in the mud is going to lift up and it's going to meet the plasma in the air, creating plateaus and mountains and other things. But in other parts of the world, the plasma is going to carve out and it's going to push in. And, at the same time, there's going to be earthquakes and things of that nature on a planetary scale, so to speak, which is going to cause massive vibration, which is going to cause liquefaction, which is basically where any dirt or sand that has high enough of a water concentration to it, which is a lot actually, the water starts to come to the surface and the sand starts to sink down. It basically turns it into quicksand, which for me helps to really make sense out of all of the mud floods that people have been talking about, and how the mud floods coincide with resets of civilizations, and these things just sink down into the ground. On the other hand, with liquefaction, some things rise up to the top, okay? So we've got some land sinking down, like, for example, Atlantis. You can have an entire continent, an entire island or group of land just going right down into the ocean, and other land that's being pulled upwards or other land that's going upwards. So a lot of terraforming is happening. The land itself is sort of reshaping itself. We do have a lot of obelisks around the world. I feel like that absolutely has to do with harnessing this energy. that these civilizations have always built these obelisks all over the place, and they look exactly like lightning conductors. I believe that's exactly what they are. They don't look like anything else that people have tried to guess at. So the plasma comes down, hits major cities, hits all the things that it's really attracted to, because plasma is sentient. You could look at it like like a ghost, essentially, like in the movie Ghostbusters, which is what I talk about, sometimes in comparison, because they use the word ectoplasm, and plasm is just short for plasma. Ecto means external, which means outside of the body. So in essence, the spirits and the ghosts that they're saying that's plasma that's outside of the body. So you could see the plasma coming in also is sentient, because some of us who have gone far enough in our past, we've come to the understanding that all things are alive and all things are sentient, as is this plasma. So that means it has a purpose. That means it has a job. It's got a mission. It has likes and dislikes. It is attracted to certain things. Some people can look at it scientifically and say, well, the electricity is attracted to metal and this and that. But the plasma is coming into our world searching for particular things, I believe, and that's why we have this whole cleansing time, the harvest time, where God is going to take basically, a big swoosh from his sickle and harvest, and the wheat and the chaff are separated, and all that symbolism. Monuments, everything will pretty much be destroyed. We've got the mud floods, like I said. Oh, the mind reset, the whole world is basically going through a reset process electromagnetically, and our brains are electromagnetic. And I believe that a lot of people are going to suffer amnesia to an extreme degree, not remembering this prior age and not remembering this prior, not everybody. It depends on your location and your energy and, your preparations and things that people have done or not done, right? But the greater majority of people who do survive, and this is like a fail-safe to me, their minds are wiped just in case any bad people are left over. You don't want them to, keep all their evil knowledge or whatnot. Their minds are just completely wiped. They wake up not knowing where they are or who they are. They still can survive. They still know how to eat and things of that nature. It's just they have no identity any longer, and they have more important things to worry about now than gangbanging and dealing drugs and, getting into the bad things of the world or whatnot. Like they're in survival mode. So I see that as a good thing as well for a lot of people. This is all basically, for me, a data harvest. It goes back to the meaning of life. And I have found that the similarities across all the religions and belief systems, that the root of all of them comes to experience. That the whole purpose for everything that we do is simply just plain old experience. Just doing it for the sake of having done it and knowing that we've done it and having been there and done that and having that experience, basically. And then the experience is not ours alone, but according to all these traditions, we are a part of a greater, grander being or energy. And that greater, grander being or energy essentially fractures itself time and time and time again, which is also the fractal verse, which I talk about, the fractal universe. And it breaks itself and fractures itself into segments and pieces each time, forgetting that it had done that. And the whole game is to find itself. It's the cosmic hide and seek that people have mentioned from time to time. And that's the main part of it. Is it's a data harvest. So our minds, our information, we have brains for a reason. We didn't have to have physical computers stuck and lodged into our bodies. It's so weird when you think about it, right? Well, this information needs to be extracted by the greater, grander, bigger being so that it can, incorporate it, into its one mind, into itself. And so it can get all of the stuff that it has worked hard to put out there. It wants a return on what it has put out there, and it wants the information back. So this is why I believe in fantasy and sci-fi and things like that, the bad guys typically want our brains, the aliens are usually seen like it's just sucking brains right out of people's heads. Zombies obviously want brains. Brains really revolve around a lot of this, and it doesn't make sense if it's for a scare factor. It could be some other body part that could be much more terrifying, than just your brain. But it's always a brain, and that's the common denominator, and that comes from the ether, that comes from us. That's our own breadcrumb that we're leaving for ourselves time and time again, because it's the same story that's been told over and over and over. So the data is collected, or the great harvest. It's a huge data harvest. There's massive fires everywhere, electrical scarring like we talked about, huge winds. The moon will break. That's another interesting one that people will start to see the symbolism if they just hear about it and then keep their eyes open. But the moon is our sister world, like I said, or possibly could be our sister world. And so it stands to reason if we're going through this cataclysm and our snow globe breaks, that in turn we would also see their snow globe break. And actually, according to various cultures that believe in multiple worlds, a lot of times they talk about how there's some sort of universal event or galactic event that is happening to all of these planets or to all these worlds all at the same time. And that's what I believe this plasma catastrophe is. It's happening to many of, at the very least, our local, what people would call galaxy, our local neighborhood, as far as realms and things of that nature go. Yeah. And just to wrap it up, as far as the things that will happen, the light will reverse as well. Right now, the light is coming down at us, and it's a very bright, huge white sunlight in the sky. I myself don't resonate with that. I resonate with the time when things were very much more easy on the eyes, and there was more of an amber glow, kind of like Twilight, which is why I believe that they named the book Twilight. But the light will be going upwards because everything is reversing. So the light was coming down, everything's reversing, the energy is reversing, the light's going to reverse as well, and it's going to go up, which will allow us to see into the heavens. It'll allow us to see behind, the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain and all the workings that are behind what we call the sun. Not to mention, the gravity will kick back in, or what people call gravity will kick back in. The electromagnetic force will come back on, and the things that didn't quite make it out will come rushing back down, and a lot of things will fall back down to Earth, which gives us our cargo cult mentality, our cargo cult world or realm, where people wake up to a post-apocalyptic world, total amnesia. They're going to start digging through all this trash and garbage that just fell down from the sky, the remnants of the prior world, to try to get an idea of what that was like. Some people may esteem certain objects or symbols or technology, and that turns into a sort of cult mentality based off of our very own cargo that has fallen back down to us. And then, of course, we've got beings from other worlds that, I believe will come in at that time as well. I call them the helpers. I think that there are beings out there that their whole purpose is to go and to be a guide to these civilizations who have just all lost their minds, quite literally. And, they all have amnesia and stuff, so they need help. They need help in order to build things back up. Now, of course, there's going to be certain benefits that come along with, instant godship, basically, like angelic title or whatnot. So I could see the benefit in that. And then, of course, last but not least, the most amazing part of it is once the sky seals back up, or the the snow globe top, once it seals back up, because it's ice, so it can easily fix itself right back up, right? The water just refreezes once all the electricity turns back on, basically. Then you have the force field kicks back in, because there's a force field above our world that people call the Van Allen belts, and that force field turns back on. The waters above, which everyone has admitted there are waters above and waters below, right? We all know this. The waters above refreeze right back over that hole at the very top, and that means that our world becomes pressurized once more, and we have an influx of all that plasma that entered into our world. It's all inside of there now, right? So the question now, the fun part, now that we've made it through all the catastrophe and death and dying and scary stuff and people getting sucked up and all the bad stuff, now is the fun part, which is the return of magic, which is the return of every single mythical, fantastical creature and story that we've ever heard of that we thought couldn't be possible. Now we have the essence of life, possibly, in abundance in our world, all over the place. And I believe that one of its first inclinations is to incorporate itself, is to find vessels, to find bodies, to find something to jump into and animate, and it wants to partake, it wants to be a part of it. It's stuck in here, and so I believe that it wants to participate in various forms. And so I believe that that plasma is inclined to take form, even if it means, for example, one of the signs to look for that many cultures across time have agreed upon when these cyclical catastrophes happen is the dead rise from their graves, right? Well, can you imagine? I could see it happening, that the plasma itself gets into a body. It's just a vessel. It's an empty vessel, you know? But that, I mean, which could give rise to our whole zombies and stuff. And I'm not saying that's going to be like in the movies and they'll be evil or anything, okay? I'm trying to look at this with a very positive attitude. But this plasma or this spirit, just like in Ghostbusters, you see the spirit, it's basically plasma just flying all over the place. You know, when the ghosts all return to New York City or whatnot, and everything's that plasma pinkish, purpley kind of a color. That's exactly what that is. Let's say that the plasma wants to find a body. We've got all these robots that we've made all around the world. You know, we've got all these artificial intelligence and stuff. What's to say that the plasma doesn't jump into those, and all of a sudden now all of our artificially intelligent, what we thought is the future, is actually the very beginning of things. And that gives rise to like the Terminator story. And, you know, like, I'm not saying they'll all be evil or anything. However, they could be still looking for the leftover trash of the world, the leftover dirt that's still out there. And, you know, to them, they would absolutely be evil. But all I'm saying is that is the return of the magical world. That means we get powers. That's the good news. We get powers like you would see on the X-Men. We get powers that like you would see on Stranger Things. We get all of these, you know, telekinesis and telepathy and anything that starts with tele. Basically, we inherit all of our junk DNA becomes activated. We become more powerful. I believe personally that we're going to see an influx of oxygen into our world, and that everything's going to start growing and growing and becoming healthier and stronger once again, as always have. Our lifespans instantly increased. And for me, it's all good news. Once you get past the whole cataclysmic event, it's paradise. You know, it's the pendulum has now reached its opposite end. You know, we went through the lowest part of that pendulum swing. Now the pendulum goes all the way back to the beginning, and the beginning is the Garden of Eden, Shambhala, paradise, heaven on earth, you know, and it's whatever we make it. And not only that, but you can imagine an influx of plasma, which is an electromagnetic phenomenon, so to speak, right? All around our world. Now the idea of these little sentient balls of light that we call pixies or fairies or all of these creatures, nothing is beyond the realm of our own imagination at this point. These things can absolutely manifest themselves and be created once again, which means that a lot of us who have an affinity to the fantastic, and the reason why we like all of these things isn't because, you know, we just want to stand out in a crowd, or, you know, we have some sort of deep-seated issues or anything, and, you know, we're introverts. No, it's because we are the strongest resonators of the truth that has happened. We remember these things on a deeper level, and whenever those energies start to shift, that we're in a male-dominated energy right now. The female energy is the one that's going to be returning, and the female energy is the one that allows for us to work on our intuition and our gut feelings and our creativity and our artistry and things of that nature. So all of our artists around the world right now, we're all tapping in to the ether. We're all tapping into that female energy that the male energy can't suppress it, because it's returning. It's popping up all over the place. And that's one of the reasons why I believe we're seeing, you know, this awakening that we see happening all over the place. Just all these people all over the place, just with speaking in their minds and coming up with wonderful ideas and asking questions and really pushing the bounds of the norms of the world, you know?
Okay, so this, as I was kind of saying, yes, it's sort of like the end meets the beginning when all this happens, because we're going back to different states that we were in. So would you say that in this reference and looking at the portal open and above, even as the floor is rising, portals below are also coming up? So if this is happening below us, it may even be an event that's happening below us.
Right.
Planes of reality.
Right. It will be. I put a lot of emphasis on the sky because that's I'll be able to see, and so I find the most interest up there. But the ground as well, it has portals within it because there are worlds underneath us, like I kind of briefly touched on earlier, which means that life will be able to spring up from the ground, which is where the Titans came from. They came up from Gaia, or Mother Earth. You know, they were born from Mother Earth basically, and came up out of the ground from the inner Earth.
Okay.
And yeah, like
so that's how everything. So when we, people say, well, how did these worlds come together? So for a period of time, they do come together, and we have these anomalies that take place around these cataclysmic events of a cleansing, of a reset, and a big cycle change. So it's kind of like markers in our own emotional inner worlds. When there's a heightened event, it sets a marker in time. So we're coming to certain markers in time that have been noted. Some of us, can relate to them by seeing the signs. And, like yourself, myself, we receive dreams that are indicating, yes, this is kind of how you can reference it. Go on. What?
Oh, I'm so sorry, but you said dreams, and that's something I also wanted to say. That's another one of the signs that the energies are shifting, is that people have an influx of dreams that in their minds. It's like they're getting mentally prepared, but they're more opening up. The energies are just manifesting everywhere, including within the body, because we're a part of everything else. So you're going to hear and see, everyone's going to see, once people venture out and actually start talking about their dreams and the things that they have seen and experienced in the dream world, everybody is going to say, oh my God, I had this exact same dream. I had a dream very similar to that. And it's just like in the movie Time Machine. Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
So in Time Machine, it's way into the future, and one of the warnings, there's this race of underworld beings called, I think they're called the Morlock or something like that. They're basically monsters. All of the humans on the surface, they have the same dream of the Morlock or whatever, and that's one of the signs. Even in the Bible, it says that I think it's like the young men will dream dreams, and the old men will have visions, something to that effect. But we very much are going to be very in tune with the things that are happening when we consider our dreams.
So in a big picture, and just to be on a more transparent level here, there are people who are still maybe going to be dropping down. There are some people staying here. There may be people moving up to a more unified Eden type experience, because of course it still is something that to a certain degree is going to happen here as a potential, but we probably still are we have so much different life here on different levels of reality that this isn't just maybe one whole big shift, because we're all in different levels already, that everyone's going to kind of be still attuned to their own particular realm that they are resonating with.
Possibly.
Okay.
I could see that. On the flip side, just to sort of play the devil's advocate to that thought, because I had the same exact thought for a very long time. But then whenever I stepped out of division, as seeing other people as being separate from myself. For example, I'm on, let's pretend, and I'll compare myself to a pretend person over here, right? Well, I'm like Mother Teresa on this side, or let's make him Mother Teresa, right? This is Mother Teresa over here, and then I represent like Hitler or somebody that's just, traditionally known as being bad, one of the bad guys of the world. Well, then we would say, well, the good person is going to be, whisked away to some good place, or, something good or whatnot. And then the bad person, they need to work out this or that. I could see that within the veil of separation, if we were to look at one another as being separate from one another. But when we look at each other as being connected and the exact same as one another, there is no longer any reward or punishment. Like I said, it's all there for the experience of it all, good, bad, or ugly. You know what I mean? So I enjoy the concept that good is rewarded. People go to
I think I would probably much less put it in good, bad terms, but I mean as a level of development, so a level of understanding. And I mean like just a general karmic evolution. So meaning that there are very young souls here who have just come in, and to catapult in a sense to that it's all going to be the Garden of Eden for everyone. I'm not real sure if that's a practical sense. And meaning, I just want maybe people to understand, it's kind of like the world right now, if we truly look at it, we are in the middle world, but there's lower levels of the middle world and there's upper levels. And I never actually even look at it as being above or below, but because you could be centered and be in what would be termed the lower worlds in hell and have a beautiful experience, but be centered, so it's more about being neutral and centered, but still, I think there are different levels of experience because you can only move to what you can believe in and resonate with, and it's this the most that happens with our own it's our own self judging us. So it's not even tentacles in the sky judging in a sense. It's basically what we've placed ourselves in resonance with. I think more. Because I'm still writing the story if I and truthfully, as far as let's say I get hit and taken out, it's still a matter of where I'm transitioning to because I wake up someplace else. But it's the level of what kind of a life review I can really resonate with in the most truthful space because, as you're approaching death, you tend to become very emotionally heavy. And it's interesting, I've only had like the experience once that it touched me where there was just like some kind of a funky heartbeat I was having. And I was like, wow, I feel like this could take me out sometime. And you automatically start to think of the bad things that you feel like are still weighing heavy on you. And what you become very honest with a certain part of your higher self, looking at yourself. Right. And so there's that place begins to take place for people in that, life review kind of format. And so we tend to sometimes feel like we have that unfinished business to be in some place. So there are, there's people who are right in the middle of this generally lower level that we're in of the middle world, and it's heaven to them. But there's other people who are here and it's their created hell, correct? You know what I mean? So we have, and no matter what level you're at, we can have all of these different types of experiences, based on what we resonate with and can believe in and have maybe cleansed. But so I was just thinking about how, to kind of maybe help our practical minds that really can't be too strong of a hold over what's happening, but to understand that maybe that's how we talk about it is a fall, that giants or Nephilim have come into this realm, beings who were a different, technically advanced and more occult understanding advanced and then become gods here, and how titans could have been around at the time of giants due to these anomalies that take place. Mm-hmm. There must be a period of time then, and even with the reptilians and humans, and of course those theories of our souls evolving potentially even through all of the stone and the algae and the plants and the trees and then animals and insects. Some shamans here believe we have animism souls, which I believe and resonate with. And that, we have all of these genetics for everything we're talking about. Like you said, we have the genetics within us in the junk DNA. We have it all within us. Everything that you talked about in the potentials, right? All of those DNA potentials, given the right atmospheric conditions, we can bring forth again.
as well as what I like to call, I refer to spirit memory. So while we're in here, while we're in the snow globe, so to speak, the reincarnation cycle, it works its process or whatnot. But our spirit, our core energy retains the information. It retains certain information that it takes from life to life. And so, we also have that too. Have you ever, I don't know if I shared it with you, but there was like this, every once in a while you've got, like in the news and stuff, there's always some sort of insider from the Illuminati or the Freemasons or whatever, and they're leaking this information. Well, there was this one document that I had come across where this guy was talking about how, hey, we've got a rule. Every once in a while, we have to make ourselves available to the public. I'm not going to come out and just give you guys all the answers, but you can ask me whatever you'd like to. And he really tried to give hints to people, like to try to direct their questioning. It was just an online forum that people were asking questions. And so they were asking this guy a lot of questions about, everything they've ever wanted to know, basically, starting with really insignificant things to the bigger things. And one of the interesting stories that he told was the catalyst story of basically like evil in our world, or specifically the initial evil, or the being that's looked at as satanic or Satan or the bad guy or the devil or whatnot, that entity was actually good, but became a catalyst for us to experience the option to say no, or the option to partake. Yeah. Otherwise, we were just, like I said, our minds are blank. Yeah. We're essentially robots. We just do whatever we're told. We don't know the difference between right and wrong. So we have a catalyst introduced to us saying, hey, here's what it looks like to be rebellious. Here's what it looks like to do something bad. And then all of a sudden we have the option. Now we can choose not to do it of our own accord instead of not doing it by default, right?
And I believe in that. It totally has to be that way. There's no other way, I would think, to have an experience here and it be of importance to us the way we're wired, if it was robotic and we just followed, and did everything one way.
Well, that's because you're a good person. And so you're a good person, and we live in a fractal universe, which is the code inside of the code inside of the code inside of the code. And because you're a good person, that means by nature, everything is connected and everything is one. Everything has to be good too, because Cindy Magnuson is a good person. And therefore, everything that is an extension, outwardly or inwardly, also has to be good. If we see it as anything other than good, then there is simply our perspective is skewed. It's basically truth that's just been tied into a knot. Everything is truth. Everything is good. Everything is, or biblically speaking, the Bible says all things are working together for good. And it goes on after that. I'm just going to use that part though. All things are working together for good. Everything has to be truth. Everything has to be good. There can ultimately be no ultimate lies, no original evil, no original bad. It all has to be aspects of the ultimate, which is what we would call good. I think you and I would probably be closer to calling it like the neutral, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Something along those lines. But in essence, ultimate energy manifesting itself in various forms. What we consider to be the polarity of good and evil are just tools for us to use while we're here. So that's something that I have a hard time with my viewers sometimes. I have to let them know at what level I am coming at what level I'm talking and discussing particular topics, because it can be confusing for some whenever you're talking about, like, say, giants or something, and then all of a sudden you get real deep into the spiritual aspect that we're all connected, we're all one, and the Illuminati is actually, they're not bad, like... People are like, I don't know. You lost me on that one. It's because we look at life at different levels, which is a part of the fun of life.
I think, to understand free will choice and an option that, at a certain point, let's just say that in terms of saying something's evil or bad, I would say that there is an understanding that one can be driven to such fear and pain and suffering that the opposing mere shadow aspect of them can come within them and overtake them to a degree that their true soul essence of that portion of good gets pushed out and tethered. And in that respect, someone lifetime after lifetime, as far as shamanistic studies go, they lose their soul. And these are the mental astral bodies of the jinn that are like running around in the dimension free here. There are a lot of why people say you have to be careful with who you are channeling and talking to, because they're shapeshifters. They can't reincarnate again. So all they have to do is, all they have is just running around like that, and causing trouble and trying to get into someone's body. And I've had closer experiences with people around me who are like that. And, you're saying Cindy Magnuson's good. And I'm thinking, trust me, I could be a volcano at any moment that I had to be a volcano. And
the world needs volcanoes.
Energy field, yes, because when, I can have understanding, but I also have to have boundaries and limits.
Right, that would be the lower levels. Then I'm totally cool with that too, because I have my own limits, and I get frustrated.
Yeah, and yet, right, to stay in neutral, I will state this wonderful point that Steve Richards had made, who's coming on, and he said that when you say to the universe that you don't understand how someone could do that, the judgment in our words when we say, they need to be this, and this to them for what they did. And if you act on that and do that, well, you need to be careful, because you are stating to the universe, I don't understand how someone could do that. And what you do is you set yourself up for coming back into a lifetime understanding what it's like to be them. And that's how I can see that our experiences, as you were saying, experiences. So I do always want to state that I see someone out of balance. I can tell they're doing it out of fear. I've sat in really challenging positions of watching someone who, through drug use, opened up their demon side, their own shadow demon side that's supposed to stay in the underworld, and allow that energy to come in. And once that energy comes in, it pushes the real person out. And that's a little bit of the trouble that's taking part in our world, that there's so much drug use. Even, this lady I was talking with said, even the ayahuasca, it's so taken over by dark shamans that we are introducing, people are opening up with these veils being thinned, with this happening. I can almost see that this isn't cracking even just at once. That's the peak experience, but it's opening now. So people are closer to inviting aspects of themselves in, and how better to know who you truly are and where you're at, what you can choose, unless you have these experiences. So, to this person around me, I've said, I honor your experiences, but I have to have boundaries, and say, I have to protect myself from the energy that you're going through, and here's the consequences. Here's what I could do, but here's the consequences here, because I can't be responsible even for what that person has chose, and what the energy that's been opened up and is in there will feed off of my energy by supporting that person. And then that enables the situation. So these energies want to feed, in a sense, off of. So there's a lot of that happening right now. People who would say they, go on antidepressants, well, that puts them in resonance with these lower levels. And that's how you get these voices in. It's a mental astral body from even their own shadow from another past life. Well, again, that's not bad. That can be good if they're ready to battle it in their own internal battle. and have a support system around them to understand it and make it out of this place, because it's an opportunity for them to clear an old memory, an unfinished business, part of them that's being held even in a lower place, and correct it, because it stays on your memory, you know. But the people who transition with these thought forms and mental astral bodies in their demon level within themselves, well, they carry that with them again, you know. There's greater opportunity here, but, you know, and is that bad? No, because how many times did I go through it? Maybe I don't know, you know. I'm here now because maybe I kept fighting it, you know. And, you know, it's interesting you were saying is wiping the memories and that, and how you at an early age were being cued to remember already. The earliest memory in my entire life is that on a yearly basis, I would say, I'm going to remember it. I'm going to remember it. And then when I watched all your videos talking about it, you know, and IT, you know, I kept thinking about, oh my gosh, that just relates so much because the word it was so prominent, you know.
Right.
And so, and even it that it's information technology and everything, the whole it. But I had a dream about sitting at a desk, and I was in somewhat of an, you know, kind of cocky place in another dimension, and maybe even the time before the last catastrophe, and saying, oh, it's going to be easy to remember. It's going to be easy to remember. And it's really not that easy to come back in here and remember. But the breadcrumbs, kind of like Doctor Who. I love Doctor Who also. I found it fascinating, you know, talking about the bad wolf all the way through and everything. I found some of their references again. I think there's always a little bit of twisted stuff, but we should be probably closing out the show, but we could come back in and talk about more stories. I'd like to tell you about some information that I've learned about werewolves and stuff, and the werewolf stories and things like that, and animism and what takes place, and it kind of answers a little bit more things. But I want to say that your explanation of that plasma theory space and how you explained it was excellent. You have just done, I was wowed. I'm wowed. And I'm not always easily impressed. Patting myself in the back a little bit, but seriously, your videos are great. I highly encourage everyone to check out your channel at JayDreamerZ. And so as we're ending the show here, can you tell us about how to get in contact with you, what you're at, where you're at, what they can do to support you, and what you have upcoming?
Yeah, sure. Well, I don't really have social media anymore. I pretty much got rid of Facebook and all that stuff. So I'm really focusing on YouTube right now. And so you can go to, you know, JayDreamerZ with the Z at the end, and just type that in YouTube and my channel pops up. This is my full-time job. So, you know, from time to time, people show their support. They give me a donation or something, and there's a PayPal link on my website, which is always appreciated. I do have membership enabled on my channel, so people can support me in that way as well. So all the members get like custom loyalty badges and unique emojis they can use in the chat if they're in the chat room, things of that nature, as well as my contact information, because I do have hundreds of people that reach out and are constantly wanting to contact and talk to me and stuff, and I don't have time for all of that. So I really just kind of focus on correspondence with members, and they all have my YouTube email address where they can, you know, send me videos or say hello or things of that nature. I'm writing a book. I'm still in the middle of writing my book right now, Ancient Oblivion. It's going to incorporate all of the plasma catastrophe. It's probably going to begin with that and end with that, would be appropriate. But I will be talking about the Titans, the El or the Elven race in my book, and you know, kind of get into like a short version of the history that has been hidden from us, and as well as like fantasy as reality and all the things that we've kind of touched on today. And aside from my book, I will be coming out with a website shortly as well. That'll be my own transition. I don't know if when the website's done, I might stay on YouTube for a while or use it for, for other things, but I'm really going to put a lot of focus on my website when I'm done with that. That's going to be a compendium of everything that I have, basically all the pictures that I have to share, all my library. I have a whole PDF library of esoteric books numbering over 10,000 volumes that people will be able to come and check out books and look at esoteric books and things like that, as well as a Discord chat server on my my website as well, so that like-minded people can come and chat at all times, because I do brag about having one of the best chat rooms on YouTube. Very mature, minded people are constantly contributing and things. It's not like one of those chat rooms where people are just, you don't want to read it or anything, but it's a lot of adult-minded people, a lot of mature-minded individuals who are in there being very positive. The other thing I do want to say is, I do want to plug my Tuesday nights. I do something called a segment called the Sylvan Lining. And that's every Tuesday, basically, as long as I can help it, I'm there to look at the positive side of the truth-seeking path, because we all we get distracted from time to time. We have the best intentions and we realize we're doing this all for good reasons, but the more negative information and the more disappointed we are when we see things, the more overwhelming it can be, and then we forget the goal, we forget the purpose and the reason why we started all of this. So Tuesdays is my day to breathe easy and to smile and to return to a loving attitude and, one of care and things like that. So if you're out there and you feel overwhelmed or depressed or upset or angry at the system or whatever, Tuesdays is when we all come together and we all have, a great time in the chat. We really encourage each other. And I talk about one specific topic that people, including myself, go through whenever we're having a hard time. And I look at the lighter side of it and the good reasons to those things,
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's why you are a very, very big part of this series here. I appreciate that very much. Thank you so much for all of this incredible time that you gave us. I wish you all the success with your new endeavors in teaching your workshops, your book, and your upcoming website. I will have that contact information also on your YouTube channel underneath the radio show here. So I will say good night to you and to everyone else here. And next week's show is going to be with Sylvie Ivanova of New Earth. She is just returning from her expedition from Italy, so she's going to be showing us her new findings. So I'm very excited to have that as a next show in this series. So thank you and good night, Jay. All the best to you.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.